Mike Dean, and Jeeva and I have been working on the clinical trial accelerator. My background is in clinical trials. I'm a physician, and I've been doing clinical trials for 25 years. This slide shows a complex wheel on the right side, and this wheel has a host of activities that have to be accomplished. Next slide, please. What happens is an investigator who's brilliant on the left side comes up with an idea, develops a grant proposal, submits a grant proposal for up to 2 years of review at an agency such as the National Institutes of Health, and eventually gets the grant and the funding, and this develops into the implementation of a clinical trial. Some of these clinical trials are international, and some of them involve thousands of individuals at hundreds of institutions. So it's an extremely complex implementation process. Next slide, please. One of the issues is that data coordinating centers help the investigators, and when the investigator has his eureka moment on the left, push the button, please. And then what happens is he becomes the investigator on the right side, and this investigator is now immediately frustrated that the data coordinating center and all the other parts of the machinery aren't instantaneously working. The National Institutes of Health is one funding agency, and what happens is that they also have an impatience for the startup to be instantaneous. So this slide shows one of the problems that we face in this. Clinical coordinators are not physicians or nurses in general, but are well-trained individuals who have learned how to start up clinical trials. And you see the poor guy on the left side, he's facing a protocol that may be 100 to 200 pages of very technical jargon. And that person has to instantiate all of the activities that are in that complicated wheel. Now, obviously, the upper left-hand quadrant is statistics. He doesn't have to write the statistics, but he has to coordinate the statistical team, and he has to coordinate all of these other activities. Next slide. Some of the activities that that coordinator has to immediately do, him or herself, involve checklists, project work plans, building databases, and getting people to build those databases and creating training materials. So a host of activities that I envision us putting into the clinical trial accelerator by the future dream deadline. We selected human research protection requirements for our demo project. Next slide. The Human Research Protection Program is required across the globe. It's different in different parts of the world, and my work is obviously in the United States, though Jeeva and I are both in Europe in the middle of the night as we speak here. This is the Human Research Protection Program, and you can see the gamut of complications that are here, and the research coordinator has to know all of these ramifications as they put together an important document called the Informed Consent document, which is evaluated by the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB, on the left-hand side. This review is almost foundational to starting any of the other activities that have to go on with implementation. So it is a significant bottleneck. Next slide. The Informed Consent document is a document that an investigator is going to use when they talk to a patient. You can go to the next slide. And it has a bunch of problems with it. One of them is it has to be understandable without technical expertise. And in our instance, it has to be, I'm a pediatrician, it has to be understandable to a patient who is an adult, or a parent who is consenting permission for their child, or a child who's old enough to assent to make a decision about participating in a clinical trial. And there are very specific regulatory requirements that have to be included in the different sections. One of the interesting things is that brilliant investigator who wrote the NIH grant generally knows nothing about how to put together an informed consent document. Next slide. That means that this poor research protocol or research coordinator who has 100-page or more of complex text has to convert it into a 15-page document. It doesn't have to be 15 pages, but that's sort of the average. And you can go ahead and click on the next buttons here. What we've got now is an LLM drafting an informed consent document in 14 seconds. The normal timeline for this is that the protocol has to be understood by the coordinator. The coordinator writes a draft, and then this was generally going to take a month to 2 months. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Jeeva for the technical discussion.
Thank you, Mike. So we wanted to build this prototype, very simple one, and also wanted to get early feedback from the consultants. So we picked up a technical stack that is very closer to the production ready production ready stack. So we've gone with for front end, we've gone with Vue.js and React.js frameworks. For the backend, we are using Python, which is powered by Fast API, and then we are using OpenAI models. For vectorization, we're using a quadrant database for storing the vectors, and we are also utilizing the local file system for now. This will be changed in the future replaced by a database, so we can persist the data. At the moment, our application is kind of a stateless, apart from the fact that the PDF is only kept for a while. And then we are using libraries like Langsmith for monitoring and tracing, and I'm using LangChain, and then we're using MUP and PDF library for processing the PDF files we're uploading. Moving on to yeah, so we're concentrating on only two user journey here. So basically, one is uploading the PDF files, uploading the trial documents, and then it gets processed in the backend by a pre-processing background job. And the background job is simply going to take the PDF, chunk into multiple chunks, and then vectorize and store in the quadrant database. So this is our first user journey. So once the document is processed and ready to process, the consultants can move on to the user journey too. Next one. So in here we are basically, if you look into the multi-agent graph, the backend is powered by the multi-agent graph, and multi-agent graph has got like 7 agents working in parallel, generating a specific part of a document that is going to be part of the consent form that we're going to generate. So we only took master consent form as an example to show for this POC, and then we will be adding more features to it in the future. Moving on to there are other components also as part of the background. We have Quadrant Retriever, Prompt Factory, and RAG Builder. The Quadrant Retriever is simply a quadrant client, which is acting as a retriever. Prompt Factory is where we manage all the prompts required for the agents, and RAG Builder is going to provide you a generic RAG chain, and that will be consumed by the agents for the processing. This is how our graph is going to look like on a high level. And then moving on to the next slide. Quick demo of the application. Okay, so as we discussed, we have two user journeys. One is uploading new file. We just upload the file, and then once the file is uploaded, we just go on to the select document. Once the document is processed, you'll see this option enabled for the user. So select that option and proceed. And then you can see we have like different options, different forms we can generate out of it. At the moment, we are only generating the consent form. The other ones are in the pipeline. We also have the chat with your trial, which will give you a nice chat interface to interact with the PDF files for your trial documents. And then we're going to the consent form. We'll just click on that. The agents are going to come into play. It's going to generate the consent form on the fly. And I guess it gets streamed directly onto the front end, and it's also parallelly run streaming. But there are some improvements need to be done, but it's still at the early stages. The documents are generated. Once it's generated, we give them a nice interface of like downloading the PDF. Okay, and you can download the PDF. It looks like this, and they can simply verify the documents. And also, we are giving this additional feature of like when you click on a particular field, you can see an additional pop-up. You can interact with it, or you can ask it to revise the content. That's it from the demo. I'll pass it back to Mike.
So go ahead and click the 3 buttons because we're going to be out of time,
Yes.
but these are the plans for moving forward to do the low hanging fruit, mid hanging fruit, and then the high hanging fruit is actually to have the protocol itself be developed from the grant proposal. Next slide. And we would be happy to answer any questions at this time. Thank you for your attention.